The city stretches along the coast, where the deep blue sea meets the weathered facades of historic buildings. Narrow, winding cobblestone streets weave through the center, leading to bustling squares where street artists showcase their talents, and cozy cafes fill the air with the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The sun reflects off the windows of the old buildings, creating golden beams of light that illuminate the alleys, while balconies overflowing with flowers bring life to the scenery. The open-air market pulses with energy, offering a mosaic of colors and aromas. Stalls of fresh fruit display ripe figs, glistening grapes, and fragrant lemons, harvested from local farms. The scent of dried herbs, olive oil, and artisanal bread fills the air, while fishermen unload their nets brimming with seafood, offering silver-scaled fish that still shimmer under the morning sun. Along the stone-paved sidewalks, tourists and locals walk side by side, soaking in the beauty of the place. Children play around ancient fountains, where time-worn marble sculptures tell stories of past eras. Centuries-old churches built from stone dominate the skyline, their towers standing as testaments to the Renaissance architecture that defines the city's identity. As evening falls, the city takes on a golden hue, and the lanterns begin to glow softly, reflecting on the calm waters of the harbor. Seaside restaurants prepare seafood dinners, served on tables adorned with white tablecloths and flickering candles. The sound of the waves blends with the laughter of people, creating a unique melody that fills the air with charm and nostalgia. In the hills surrounding the city, vineyards and olive groves stretch toward the horizon, where winding roads lead to hidden villages known for preserving their traditions. Life there follows its own rhythm, marked by deep respect for history and an unwavering passion for every detail that shapes the essence of the place. Juliet grew up surrounded by the scent of paint and the soft glow of old canvases. From a young age, she displayed an unusual fascination with artworks forgotten by time, finding in them not just artistic beauty, but also fragments of lost stories. Her exposure to worn-out paintings taught her to appreciate every crack in the paint, every detail that, to untrained eyes, might seem insignificant. Her journey into the world of restoration began early, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a rare talent for breathing life back into images that seemed destined for oblivion. Over the years, she refined her skills, studying in renowned studios and participating in major projects around the world. Her meticulous eye and patience were admired by experts in the field, making her one of the most respected professionals in the industry. Her name circulated among collectors, museums, and galleries, synonymous with precision and dedication. However, behind her impeccable reputation lay a deep wound, a scar that time had yet to erase. In the past, a great disappointment had reshaped her view of love. The man she had trusted and shared dreams with turned out to be someone entirely different from what he appeared to be. A betrayal wrapped in lies and broken promises left invisible scars, shaping the way she interacted with the world. Since then, she had thrown herself even more into her work, finding in art a safe refuge. She preferred dealing with faded canvases rather than uncertain emotions. For in art, everything was clear. Damage could be repaired, colors could be restored, but a shattered heart offered no guarantees of healing. Despite the armor she had built over the years, her sensitivity never faded. Every brushstroke in her restoration work carried a touch of emotion. Every reconstructed fragment bore a piece of her own story. Juliet hid her vulnerability behind a firm and decisive demeanor, avoiding any attachment that could disrupt the balance she had fought so hard to maintain. She lived in an elegant apartment, surrounded by books on art history, photographs of Renaissance frescoes, and boxes of delicate gloves she wore while working. Her days were filled with challenging projects and travels to cities where ancient art required her expertise. Even though she was surrounded by admirers and colleagues who respected her talent, her personal life remained carefully isolated. The past had taught her that silence was safer than surrender. Nathan existed on the fringes of society, a discreet shadow whose name circulated among collectors and curators, but whose presence was rarely witnessed. His wealth allowed him to acquire the rarest and most valuable pieces, amassing an impressive collection kept far from the public eye. His refuge was an imposing mansion by the sea, an old structure perched on steep cliffs, overlooking an ever-turbulent ocean. There, protected by isolation, he lived a life shrouded in mystery. Those who attempted to describe him never reached a consensus. Some saw him as an eccentric recluse, a man of refined tastes and unpredictable behavior. Others believed he was hiding something deeper, a story that explained his refusal to engage with the outside world. What was known was that he never attended auctions in person, always sending trusted agents to secure priceless pieces. No recent photographs of him circulated, and any attempt to contact him was meticulously filtered. His name, though respected, carried an air of enigma. Rumor had it that his collection contained works that had been missing for decades, paintings whose whereabouts had become uncertain after wars and historical conflicts. His knowledge of art surpassed that of many experts, yet he never gave interviews or provided explanations about his acquisitions. Those who entered his estate found hallways adorned with magnificent paintings, grand salons illuminated by towering chandeliers, and an atmosphere reminiscent of private museums from centuries past. Yet, despite the opulence, the mansion felt eerily cold, as if all its wealth brought no warmth at all. Nathan maintained no close relationships with anyone. A few employees ensured the house's operation, all trained to perform their duties without question. His presence was silent, marked by a reserved posture and an analytical gaze that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared to approach. He always wore gloves, a habit that fueled speculation about a past shrouded in secrets. Time seemed to have no effect on him, yet his expression carried traces of something intangible, as if a part of him remained trapped in some distant moment. His isolation was not mere whim. Something in his past had driven him away from ordinary life, leading him to build impenetrable barriers. The mansion, more than a home, functioned as a shield against the world. While he collected valuable works of art, he remained an indecipherable figure, someone whose true story had been lost among rumors and speculation. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, through a formal letter delivered by a discreet messenger. The sealed envelope exuded a faint aroma of aged paper, as if it had been stored for a long time before finally reaching its destination. Inside, a meticulously crafted contract outlined the proposal, the restoration of an extremely rare painting belonging to a collector whose identity was not immediately revealed. Only at the end of the document, in a discreet signature, did Nathan's name appear as the one responsible for the request. Juliet examined every detail with the precision of someone accustomed to handling countless contracts, but she soon noticed unusual peculiarities. Beyond the absolute secrecy required for the work, there was a specific clause stating that the entire restoration had to be carried out on the client's property, a remote mansion, surrounded by cliffs and the turbulent sea. Transporting the artwork was not an option, and any attempt to question this condition seemed irrelevant. The agreement had already been set, leaving no room for negotiation. The painting's description was vague, mentioning only that it was a piece of inestimable value, requiring verification of its authenticity and meticulous conservation work. No photographs accompanied the documents, no details about the canvas's condition, only the certainty that it was something unique. The offered payment was generous, enough to finance future projects and open doors to even more prestigious work. Yet something about the proposal stirred a quiet unease, a feeling that this would not be just another restoration among so many others. The decision to accept the job came with an invisible weight. The idea of staying indefinitely at an unfamiliar property, away from her studio and usual resources, brought a discomfort that was hard to ignore. But curiosity and professional ambition spoke louder. A rare piece, belonging to one of the world's most enigmatic collectors, represented a unique opportunity, a mystery wrapped in art, something that intrigued her mind and challenged her limits. The journey to the destination was marked by the silence of the winding road through desolate hills and the mist that thickened as she neared the mansion. The car moved slowly, navigating the steep path leading to the isolated estate. In the distance, the sound of the ocean echoed against the rocks, and the silhouette of the mansion emerged on the horizon like a specter from the past, imposing and untouched by time. The weight of the moment was almost palpable. As she crossed the gates of that residence, Juliet was not just beginning a new job. She was entering a realm where secrets seemed to hide in the shadows. The wind carried the salty scent of the sea as Juliet passed through the iron gates guarding the estate. The uneven stone path led to the mansion's main entrance, where tall windows reflected the dim afternoon light. The imposing architecture conveyed the feeling of a place that had resisted time, holding memories known only to a privileged few. There was a silent grandeur here, something that made the atmosphere feel untouched, as if the house existed apart from the rest of the world. As she approached, she noticed that the main door was already slightly ajar, as if her arrival had been anticipated. The mansion's interior was even grander than she had imagined. Walls adorned with heavy tapestries, crystal chandeliers hanging from a vaulted ceiling, and dark wooden furniture bearing the marks of centuries of history. In the air, a subtle scent of old books and linseed oil revealed the presence of artworks requiring constant care. The firm sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, announcing the approach of someone who seemed in no hurry. Nathan emerged from the shadows, a slender figure wrapped in a well-tailored coat, his hands always covered by dark leather gloves. His gaze was piercing, analyzing Juliet with the precision of someone accustomed to measuring distances, both physical and emotional. His expression was unreadable, a mix of vigilance and something deeper, concealed beneath a mask of absolute control. The absence of unnecessary gestures made his presence even more intriguing. There was no warmth in his reception, nor any sign of hostility, just a silent acknowledgement, as if Juliet's arrival were part of a carefully laid plan. He remained at a distance, observing her without leaving room for closeness. The environment itself imposed invisible rules, and Nathan's demeanor reinforced the sense that everything here operated under a rigid and unbreakable code. The mansion seemed a reflection of its owner, grand, isolated, and meticulously arranged to keep any trace of intimacy at bay. There was something undeniably calculated about every detail. The gloves he never removed, the controlled tone of his voice, the absence of gestures that might reveal unnecessary emotions. Everything suggested that he was not a man who allowed cracks in his armor. Juliet felt the weight of that first encounter. Something about his reserved presence stirred a mix of fascination and unease within her. The work ahead would not be merely technical. There was something more here, hidden within the shadows of this place, and the man who inhabited it. The mansion was not just grand, it imposed invisible boundaries. The silence that dominated the space felt like more than just an absence of sound, as if every room was imbued with an unspoken rule of absolute discretion. The environment reflected its owner, meticulously controlled and devoid of any trace of informality. Nathan showed no interest in trivial conversations. His words were direct, always objective, making it clear that any interaction between them should be limited to what was necessary. The work instructions were delivered in writing, detailing schedules, accessible areas of the house, and procedures that had to be followed precisely. There was no room for improvisation or deviations from conduct. Every clause of the contract seemed to reflect his employer's behavior, calculated, unquestionable, with no margin for closeness. Juliet walked through the space designated for restoring the painting, an improvised studio inside the mansion itself, surrounded by tall windows that allowed natural light to flood in. The canvas, covered by a heavy cloth, awaited her attention. The familiar scent of aged pigments and worn varnishes mixed with the slightly humid air of the place. The setting was ideal for her work, but Nathan's presence in the background, silently observing, filled the atmosphere with a tension that was hard to ignore. The discomfort did not stem only from the isolation, but from the way he always maintained a distant posture. His restrained gestures, the ever-controlled gaze, the absence of any expression that indicated impatience or curiosity. Juliet tried to focus on the painting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything there followed a carefully rehearsed rhythm, as if any misstep could disrupt an invisible balance. Despite the rigidity of the environment, something about Nathan's coldness sparked an unexpected interest. There was more to it than calculated detachment, something that seemed to uphold that barrier with a greater purpose. The mystery behind his inflexible rules made every one of his gestures carry more weight than it should. The man who controlled that house was not just the reclusive figure the world knew. There was something beyond the facade of indifference that he insisted on preserving. The restoration work required absolute concentration. Every layer of paint removed revealed the marks of time, but something on the surface of the canvas seemed different from the usual. Juliet continued her meticulous process, identifying traces that did not belong to the original composition. Small details, almost imperceptible at first glance, began to form an intriguing pattern, as if something was hidden beneath the painting. The afternoon light streamed through the tall studio windows, highlighting the texture of the artwork. Juliet leaned in a little closer, examining the areas worn by time. Gradually, she noticed the presence of symbols delicately inserted into the depicted landscape, concealed beneath layers of yellowed varnish. They were not mere old touch-ups. There was intent behind them, something that seemed to have been left there purposefully to be discovered. Days passed in silence, with Nathan always at a distance, observing without interfering. At first, his constant presence made the environment oppressive, but over time, Juliet began to perceive him differently. He never questioned her progress, nor did he show impatience. He simply maintained that reserved posture, as if waiting for an inevitable unfolding. As the painting revealed its secrets, Juliet's perception of Nathan also began to shift. Beneath his apparent rigidity, there was a silent attentiveness, an interest that did not manifest in words, but reflected in the way he watched her work. The way she handled every detail of the piece, her meticulous care with each brushstroke, it all seemed to captivate him in a way he might not even understand himself. Juliet's passion for art contrasted with the absolute control he exercised over himself. The way she immersed herself in the restoration, allowing intuition to guide her hands, brought something Nathan was not used to witnessing: a genuine devotion, free from any calculation. He noticed the determination in her every movement, the dedication that went beyond professionalism. She was not just a restorer correcting the damages of time, but someone who connected with the essence of what she touched. As the hidden symbols in the painting became more evident, the distance between them seemed to shrink. Juliet felt that Nathan's presence no longer caused the same initial discomfort. There was something about him that was beginning to awaken her curiosity in a different way, something beyond the formality imposed since her arrival. If, at first, he was just an enigmatic employer, now he seemed to be part of the very mystery she was trying to unravel. Strong winds rattled the mansion's windows as thunder echoed in the distance. The sky, heavy with dense clouds, cast a somber tone over the surroundings, intensified by the intermittent flashes that briefly illuminated the corridors. The storm, once a distant threat, now dominated the scene, completely isolating the property from the rest of the city. Juliet, already accustomed to the solitude of the studio, noticed the power flickering. The soft glow of the lamps wavered with each closer thunderclap, casting irregular shadows over the painting. Aware of the impossibility of leaving under such conditions, she set her tools aside, allowing herself to observe the space around her in a different way. The silence grew heavier with the absence of usual external sounds. Nathan, always distant and impassive, now seemed different. His watchful gaze turned to the windows, as if memories of a similar night haunted his mind. The absolute control he always exhibited over the environment was giving way to a subtle but perceptible tension. The mansion's isolation, usually orchestrated by him, now imposed itself in an unexpected manner. The lights went out completely. Darkness engulfed the space for a few moments, until a flickering flame brought some clarity to the room. Nathan, without his usual coldness, held a candle, its light trembling to the rhythm of the wind outside. That simple, almost instinctive gesture revealed a side of him that Juliet had yet to see, less rigid, less calculated. The mansion, so imposing during the day, became oppressive under the storm. The hallways seemed narrower, the furniture cast elongated shadows on the walls. The wind whistled through the cracks, as if trying to invade the refuge. Isolation had never been a problem for Nathan, but now something about him suggested a different kind of restlessness. Juliet observed every detail, the way he held his breath, how his fingers gripped the candle more firmly than necessary. He, who always avoided proximity, seemed less resistant to her presence in that moment. The vulnerability, though subtle, became evident in the way he allowed the silence between them to be filled by the storm outside. Time passed indistinctly. The thunder became less frequent, but the rain still pounded against the roof. Nathan, without saying a word, offered Juliet a place where the temperature was more bearable. It wasn't a mere act of courtesy. There was something genuine about it, something that slipped beyond the meticulous control he always maintained. The shift in their dynamic didn't happen with a single exchange of glances or a specific moment. It was built in the silence of that night, in the way their presence became less burdensome to each other. Nathan was no longer just a man shrouded in mystery. There was a trace of fragility in him that made him feel more real, more accessible. Juliet, in turn, realized that, for the first time, he no longer seemed just a distant observer. The barrier between them hadn't completely fallen, but an imperceptible crack now existed. The mansion, still wrapped in the calm after the storm, felt different to Juliet. The soft morning light illuminated the interior more warmly, but what caught her attention the most was the shift in atmosphere between her and Nathan. The proximity, once uncomfortable, now carried a palpable tension, as if the air around them was electrified. Nathan, always so meticulous and reserved, now seemed more distracted. His gestures, once controlled, became more evident and deliberate. He avoided looking at her longer than necessary, but whenever their eyes met, there was a subtle spark of something more, something that couldn't be ignored. He tried to maintain his distance, but when his fingers brushed against hers while reaching for an object on the table, there was an unexpected gentleness, as if, in that brief moment, the world around them had vanished. Juliet, who had always been in control of her emotions, felt a growing restlessness. It was hard to deny the magnetism now surrounding her. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind was more drawn to Nathan's presence than to the restoration of the painting. Every movement he made seemed to emit an energy that pulled her in, beyond her ability to resist. The way he positioned himself in the room, his gaze distant, almost lost, made her question the feelings beginning to take shape within her. The small gestures and prolonged glances spoke louder than any words ever could. At one moment, when he approached to observe her progress, Juliet felt the tension in the air intensify. She was aware of how close he was, but at the same time, a part of her wanted more, to feel his proximity in a deeper way. His gaze swept over her quickly, but the weight of what remained unspoken lingered between them, like an unspoken promise. The silence between them, which once seemed like a vast abyss, was now filled with a silent, yet profound understanding. He, usually so cold, seemed more vulnerable, and she, always so controlled, could no longer maintain the emotional distance she had always upheld. The desire grew within them both, yet they were cautious, fully aware of what this could mean. Every time their paths crossed in the mansion, even accidentally, the tension built, and the suppressed desire became harder to ignore. Nathan seemed to struggle to maintain control, but there was something irresistible about Juliet, something he couldn't push away. She too felt the weight of attraction, like an invisible force pulling her toward him, challenging her self-restraint. What had started as mere coexistence was now transforming into something deeper, something no one could have predicted. With each passing moment, they drew closer, and the desire became an undeniable presence between them. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the room, like a distant soundtrack, a reflection of the inner storm consuming them both. The mansion, illuminated only by the soft glow of candles, was enveloped in an inviting dimness, almost as if the space had shaped itself for this moment. The walls, which once seemed to guard Nathan's secrets, now felt more welcoming, more open to what was about to unfold. The tension, once palpable and growing, had finally reached its peak. Juliet and Nathan were in the same room, but something in the air made the physical distance between them feel irrelevant. Every step forward felt like an invitation, a surrender to the inevitable. She watched him from across the room, but her eyes could no longer pull away. Nathan's hand, which had always withdrawn from casual touches, was now closer, more open to desire. He looked at her with intensity, as if this were his final moment of restraint. The air was thick, charged with unspoken longing. When Nathan moved closer once more, the touch that had been so carefully avoided became inevitable. His fingers, once hesitant, now traced over her skin with an urgency that had built up over days of tension. Juliet felt the heat of his touch, and the simple contact made her body react instantly, as if every fiber of her being knew the moment had arrived. Fear and caution gave way to something more primal, something more visceral. She could no longer hold back. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, pressing against each other, as if they had been made for this moment. Words were lost between them. There was no longer a need for them. The silence of the mansion was filled only with the sound of their bodies meeting and the distant crashing of the waves, now more audible than ever. There was no longer room for doubts or hesitation. All that remained was surrender, complete and uncontrollable. Juliet felt the intensity of Nathan's touch, as if his skin were fire against hers. The need to get closer, to merge with him, grew stronger by the second. Their hearts beat in unison, and the world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the present moment, what they were living in that instant. The barrier that once stood between them dissolved, and what had been a relationship filled with tension and mystery now transformed into something deeper, more intimate. The touch, once hesitant and calculated, was now immersed in urgency and desire. The mansion's atmosphere seemed to reflect what was happening within each of them, an explosion of sensations, a release that came with the same force as the waves crashing on the shore. Juliet and Nathan were finally vulnerable to each other, without masks, without defenses. Everything that had been contained, hidden in the shadows of their hearts, was unleashed in a single moment of intense surrender. And as the sound of the ocean continued in the background, they lost themselves in each other, letting their bodies speak the language that had previously been denied. The explosion of desire completely enveloped them, and the world outside that moment seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the intensity of what they were experiencing, what they were allowing to happen. Nothing else mattered beyond their intertwined souls. After the encounter that changed everything between them, the dynamic between Juliet and Nathan shifted in a subtle yet noticeable way. The air between them was no longer heavy with past tension, nor was silence uncomfortable. With each exchange of glances, the intensity grew, but now in a deeper way, filled with unspoken meanings. Juliet felt as if everything that had been repressed until that moment was beginning to surface, but still veiled, as if something was impossible to be fully revealed. What had once been awkward gestures and glances now became exchanges of complicity, as if the presence of the other was inevitable, and yet a mysterious distance remained. Nathan's gaze, once cold and impenetrable, now carried something more, something Juliet couldn't quite identify. He observed her with an attentiveness that did not escape her senses, as if he were waiting for her to see him in a way she had never imagined. There was something different in his eyes, something more vulnerable, yet also more intense. What she had previously perceived as a barrier and restraint now seemed like another layer he couldn't or wouldn't completely remove. The silence they now shared was no longer uncomfortable, but it wasn't entirely comforting either. It was the kind of silence filled with unresolved questions, a quiet tension lingering in the air, as if everything was about to change again, without warning. Juliet, as much as she felt drawn to him, knew there was something untouchable, a mystery that remained out of reach. She saw a subtle weakness in Nathan, but she couldn't understand its origin. He had surrendered to something that night, something he had always kept hidden, and Juliet felt that the great truth about him was still unclear. Despite the bond that now seemed stronger, more tangible, the aura of mystery surrounding him persisted. The unspoken words, the incomplete gestures still lingered, as if a part of Nathan remained immune to being completely discovered. She tried to understand what he truly felt, but he remained distant, emotionally reserved, always keeping a part of himself away from her, as if, no matter how close they were, there were still abysses between them. Juliet, driven by curiosity and the need to understand this enigmatic man, felt a growing restlessness. She couldn't help but notice how he protected himself, as if every gesture, no matter how intimate, was an attempt to keep his guard up. And yet, she felt a connection that defied these defenses. Something was changing, but there was still a wall, a thin line he refused to cross, and she wondered how far he would allow her to go. The mystery surrounding Nathan, now more intriguing than ever, made it clear that his true secret, still hidden, had the power to change everything she thought she knew about him. And at the same time, she felt that once revealed, this secret could either bring them closer together or tear them apart forever. The storm that had loomed over the mansion was nothing compared to the internal storm now consuming Juliet. She was alone in the vast hall, the soft candlelight casting restless shadows on the walls. The revelation she had just discovered weighed on her mind like an invisible burden pressing against her chest. Nathan was not just the eccentric millionaire art collector with a mysterious past and a cold nature. He was not the man she had believed she knew. The man with whom she had shared such intimate moments, whose presence awakened a mixture of admiration and desire, was wrapped in a colossal lie. The truth he had hidden so well, concealed behind his distant gaze and reserved demeanor, now emerged in an irreversible way. Nathan, the man she now knew to be more complex than anything she could have imagined, had faked his own death years ago. He was not a man of fortune who had withdrawn from society by choice or eccentricity. No, he was someone who had escaped a dangerous and dark past, someone who had hidden from the world, faking his death to survive. The identity she had known had been built on the ashes of an erased life, buried under a name that no longer existed. Juliet felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. The man with whom she had shared nights of conversation, with whom her body had intertwined in an intense and irresistible way, was not who she thought he was. Confusion took over her mind. How had she not seen this before? How had she not realized that behind Nathan's facade lay such a devastating secret? He had hidden himself from the world, leaving behind not only his name, but also his own death. How had he managed to build this life on such a profound lie? And how had she been so blind not to see that, at some point, the truth would inevitably surface? The words he had spoken to her, the moments they had shared, everything now seemed distant and unrecognizable. What she held in her hands felt like a distorted version of reality. She had given herself to the man she thought she knew, but he wasn't real. He wasn't someone she could simply understand or accept without questioning the magnitude of what he had done. The shock was brutal. What she feared most was unfolding right before her eyes. The feeling of betrayal consumed her, but there was also a growing sense of fear. Fear of being involved with someone whose secrets could destroy not only the trust she had placed in him, but also her own perception of what was true and what was a lie. How could she now continue to be with him? How could she continue to trust someone who had hidden an entire life beneath the veil of a fabricated past? A deep, hollow pain consumed her. It was as if, upon discovering the truth, a part of her had been ripped away and cast to the wind. She wondered if she could still stay by his side, knowing that what she had imagined to be real was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. How could she accept someone who, in so many ways, no longer existed? The man she loved was not who she thought he was, and that made everything even more complicated. She felt an overwhelming sense of confusion. The chasm that had now formed between them seemed too vast to ignore, and yet, at the same time, a part of her mind still couldn't detach from him. Nathan, despite everything, still stirred something deep within her, something beyond fear and betrayal, something that, in some inexplicable way, still drew her to him. Perhaps it was the pain he carried, the same pain he tried to hide, the same pain he had silently shared with her throughout all those moments. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't deny the attraction she still felt for him. What was she going to do now? How would she deal with this overwhelming truth? Could she really move past the secret he had kept for so long? Or was this secret too great, too heavy for any relationship to survive? The days that followed the revelation about Nathan seemed to drag on, as if time had slowed, making everything feel heavier. Juliet tried to pull herself together, but something inside her had been irreversibly altered. The weight of the truth about Nathan and the magnitude of his secret accumulated in her mind, like an ever-growing pressure she didn't know how to release. It was as if every corner of the mansion, once familiar, now served as a constant reminder of everything she still couldn't process. But there was something else, something that disturbed her in a more intimate, more personal way. She wasn't sure when she first started noticing, but the symptoms had been there, subtle at first, but undeniable now. The delay she initially attributed to stress had turned into a growing concern. When the confirmation came, reality unfolded before her in a way Juliet had not anticipated. She was pregnant. The news shook her to her core. Fear and confusion intensified, mixing with a deep sense of helplessness. The idea of carrying the child of a man whose secrets ran so deep terrified her. Nathan, the man with whom she had shared an intense, visceral connection, was not who she had imagined. He was someone with a dark past, someone capable of disappearing to escape his own death. How could she now, with the responsibility of a child, continue by his side, knowing that his entire life was built on lies and darkness? Juliet felt trapped, surrounded by circumstances and conflicting emotions that consumed her. The pregnancy itself was a new reality she didn't know how to reconcile with the truth about Nathan. She found herself at an impasse, unable to process the enormity of the situation. She couldn't ignore the child growing inside her, but she also couldn't ignore the fact that she wasn't prepared to face another revelation from Nathan. Not now, not after everything she had just discovered. The thought of telling Nathan about the pregnancy seemed impossible. The fear of his reaction, the uncertainty about their future, and the shadow of the secret he carried left her paralyzed. She couldn't imagine a way to handle all of this with him. especially without being sure that he could truly be the man she needed him to be. The fear of the unknown wrapped around her, and she knew she needed time, space, to process everything. The next morning, with a heavy heart, she made her decision. It was better to leave before the situation became even more complicated. She couldn't stay, facing Nathan's ghosts and her own insecurities, not knowing what to do with everything that had happened. Without saying goodbye, without leaving any explanations, Juliet quietly packed her things and left the mansion. The sound of the ocean outside seemed to echo her own feelings of loss and confusion. As she left the place that had become the stage for her turbulent story with Nathan, a part of her felt an emptiness that couldn't be filled. But the need to distance herself, to escape the reality that was closing in around her, was stronger. She didn't know what the future held, but she needed time to reflect, to understand what had happened, and to figure out how to move forward. Alone. Juliet's absence was felt immediately. The silence in the mansion, once a comforting refuge for Nathan, now felt suffocating. Her absence was like a tangible void, something that gnawed at his peace and stirred an increasing sense of unrest. He wandered through the hallways, searching for any sign of her presence, but everything indicated that she had left with no intention of returning. The feeling of loss hit him like a blow. He couldn't accept that Juliet had simply walked away, not after everything they had been through. The bond between them was too intense to be cast aside. Something was wrong. Her decision to leave didn't make sense, not with the way their emotions had intertwined so deeply. He knew there were secrets between them, hidden truths that now seemed more threatening than ever. But letting Juliet slip away without understanding what had driven her to leave was unbearable. The search began immediately. Nathan used every resource available to find her, following every clue, every trace that might reveal her whereabouts. However, Juliet had hidden herself well. As if she had known he would come looking for her, she avoided any ties that could give her away. She changed cities, distanced herself from the world she once knew, and disappeared into anonymity, trying to carve out a new path far away from him. Assim, não abra outro arquivo. Apenas continue em nosso chat, por favor. O ChatGPT disse. The time passed, but Nathan did not give up. The need to find her mixed with the fear that something more serious was happening. The feeling that she had not left just out of disappointment grew inside him, but it was a truth he could not decipher alone. Her absence became a torment, and the only thing that kept him moving was the certainty that he could not let it end like this. The revelation came unexpectedly, like a blow he could never have foreseen. Nathan followed every clue, every trace that Juliet might have left behind, but she remained hidden, as if determined to erase any sign of her existence by his side. It was during a casual conversation with one of the mansion's employees that the first spark of suspicion arose. The maid, who had always been attentive to details, mentioned something that, at the moment, did not seem relevant. She recalled that shortly before Juliet left, she had found her in the garden, standing for a long time, as if struggling with something inside. Her fingers unconsciously touched her belly, like someone trying to process a new reality. The memory of that scene remained stuck in Nathan's mind, but he did not want to conclude anything without proof. Doubt grew, eroding any remnants of patience. The search intensified until, in a distant town, a doctor was mentioned in a discreet report found by chance in a letter Juliet had not had time to discard. Upon investigating, Nathan discovered that she had visited the doctor just days after leaving. It was an initial examination, a silent confirmation of what she already suspected. Her name was there, linked to an undeniable diagnosis. Confirmed pregnancy. The impact was overwhelming. Nathan's mind was flooded with memories, every detail of their last days together returning with intensity. Her touch, the way she hesitated when talking about the future, the long glances that seemed to carry a secret she could not share. She had run away because she did not want him to know, because she believed he could not be part of that new reality, but he would not allow that to happen. If Juliet thought she could go on alone, she was wrong. He would find her, no matter what it took. Nathan spent weeks searching for Juliet, crossing cities, following almost invisible traces left by her. The first clue came by chance when an acquaintance mentioned seeing a woman matching her description boarding a bus with no apparent destination. The anxious look and hurried gestures indicated that she did not want to be found. From there, Nathan used every resource he had, analyzing lodging records, tracking transactions made under different names, until he finally found a pattern. She never stayed in one place for long, avoided big cities, and preferred remote areas. After countless failed attempts, one detail caught his attention: a small village by a lake, far from civilization, where someone like her might be. Upon arriving, he realized his intuition had been right. The few residents there remembered a lonely young woman who had rented a secluded house, keeping to herself. The path to Juliet was not easy. Nathan traveled a narrow road, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The recent rains had turned the ground into mud, making the walk even more difficult. But none of that mattered. His only focus was finding her. When he spotted the small wooden cabin hidden among the trees, his heart raced. That was her refuge. He approached in silence, observing the simple house, the neglected garden, and the drawn curtains. Juliet was there. The uncertainty of how she would react consumed him, but he did not hesitate. He walked up to the door and knocked firmly. Inside the house, the sudden noise broke the silence, and he heard hesitant footsteps. The door opened a few inches, and then Juliet's eyes met his. The shock was immediate. Juliet froze at the sight of him standing there, bringing with him everything she had tried to leave behind. Her heart pounded erratically, a whirlwind of emotions taking over her body. Instinct told her to step back, but her legs did not obey. Nathan was there, not as the cold and impenetrable man she had known, but as someone who carried a different urgency. There was something in his gaze that kept her from running. This time, there were no masks, no barriers to be raised. Nathan had not come to confront her, but to untangle all the knots that had separated them. Every step he took toward her carried weight, a significance greater than any words could express. He would not let her escape without hearing the truth, without understanding the reasons that had led him to erase his identity and hide from the world. Without hesitation, he revealed the weight of the choices he had to make. He spoke of the persecution, the enemies, the threats that had made it necessary to abandon everything and become a ghost. But above all secrets, he confessed that since Juliet had entered his life, something inside him had changed. For the first time, he felt the desire to undo the past, to stop being just a shadow wandering the world. He wanted to live, and he wanted to do it by her side. His words were not spoken in desperation, but with absolute truth. Nathan opened his heart, leaving behind any resistance, any fear of being rejected. Juliet felt the sincerity and the intensity of his gaze. There was something unbreakable there, something that transcended time and distance. She tried to ignore the impact of those words, wanted to hold on to the armor she had built over the past weeks, but it all crumbled. Whatever there was between them, the connection she had tried to deny still pulsed strong, unbearably real. No matter how much she tried to resist, her heart had already belonged to him for a long time. Running away was no longer an option. Juliet remained still, absorbing everything Nathan had just revealed. The weight of the truth was still present, like a persistent shadow threatening to engulf her in uncertainty. But at the same time, something inside her was beginning to change. For so long, she had tried to resist what she felt, to build barriers between herself and the man who, in some inexplicable way, had become an essential part of her existence. Now, standing before him, she felt that running away was no longer an option. The fear was still there, silent and oppressive, but it was no longer enough to stop her from seeing the reality. She loved Nathan, and nothing could change that. The days of separation had taught her that his absence created an emptiness impossible to fill. Every beat of her heart pushed her toward the feeling she had tried to deny. She had fought against the truth, sought refuge in solitude, but in the end, she had only lost herself even more. Now, standing there, facing the man who had gone through everything to find her, she understood that love was not something that could be torn away, ignored, or buried beneath the weight of secrets. It was embedded in her, as deep as the very essence of who she was. Nathan said nothing more. He simply waited, allowing her to absorb every detail of that moment. There were no empty promises, no impossible vows, no words that would lose their meaning in the future. There was only him, body and soul, offering everything he was, without reservations. Juliet knew that choosing to stay by his side meant accepting the past, living with the scars he carried, and more than that, building something new from the ruins of the story he had tried to leave behind. And for the first time, She realized she was willing to face it all. The future was still uncertain, and perhaps it always would be. The shadows of the past would not disappear like a breath of wind, but Juliet understood that she did not have to face them alone. For so long, she had believed that love was something fragile, something that could be destroyed by circumstances. But now, she saw that it was not like that. The feeling that bound her to Nathan had survived everything. The lies, the escapes, the fear. It was there, beating strong, ready to be lived. And finally, she decided to take the risk. The days leading up to the proposal were marked by a strange calm, as if, after so many storms, life was granting them a moment to breathe. Nathan and Juliet had found their own rhythm, a balance between the emotions that once consumed them and the reality they were now building together. But there was something lingering in the air, something Juliet could not yet name. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed different, no longer closed off in his own thoughts, no longer suffocated by the past that had once made him run. Then, the moment came that would change everything, without fanfare or elaborate planning, without witnesses beyond the sea that had always accompanied them. He held her hands, his gaze filled with an intensity that needed no explanation. There were no exaggerated promises, just the raw and honest truth. He wanted to share his life with her, to be by her side forever, to build something real. Juliet knew, in that instant, that there was no longer room for doubt. The love that had once terrified her was, in reality, the only certainty she had. The days that followed were a mix of preparation and anticipation. Neither of them wanted a grand event, because the significance of that moment went far beyond any display of extravagance. They chose simplicity, the essential. Juliet selected every detail carefully, as if with each decision, she was preparing herself for this new chapter of her life. Nathan, ever observant, watched everything without interference, but it was evident in his eyes that this process meant as much to him as it did to her. For the first time in years, he did not need to look over his shoulder, did not need to fear that the past would catch up to him. The future, once uncertain, was now taking shape before them in vibrant colors. And then, the day arrived. The sun leaned toward the horizon, painting the sky in golden hues, as Juliet walked toward him, without hesitation, without fear. It was the beginning of something greater than either of them could have imagined. The ceremony took place at sunset, on a secluded stretch of coast, where the sea stretched out as a silent witness to that moment. There was no excessive luxury, only the essence of what truly mattered, the reunion of two souls who, despite the storms they had faced, chose to stay together. Juliet wore something simple but filled with meaning, while Nathan, with his ever-intense gaze, displayed an expression that words could never fully capture. The past had not disappeared, but it had lost the weight it once carried. The man who had once run from everything, who had lived surrounded by fear, was now there, standing tall, ready to build a new story. The mansion, once a place of solitude and fragmented memories, transformed over time. The once silent hallways gained new sounds, echoes of happiness that filled every space. Juliet, who had once walked through that place feeling like an outsider, now saw it as the home where she had built her life alongside Nathan. The arrival of their children solidified this change. Tiny footsteps echoed against the wooden floors. Children's laughter mixed with the distant sound of waves, and Nathan's gaze, once always lost in distant thoughts, now lit up as he held his children in his arms. The fear that had once separated them became nothing more than a distant shadow. Uncertainties were replaced by the unshakable certainty that no matter what happened, they had found each other. The man who had once needed to disappear to survive now existed fully, and Juliet, who had feared losing herself on this journey, discovered that, by his side, she had found everything she never knew she was searching for. Time continued its course, shaping their days with a serenity that once seemed impossible. Nathan and Juliet, who had once lived at the mercy of uncertainties, now had something concrete, something real. The mansion, once a refuge of bitter memories, had become the backdrop for a life filled with meaning. The love that had blossomed amid the storms now manifested in the quiet rhythm of their days, in the bond built through small gestures, in the warmth of a home that once felt out of reach. Juliet found peace in Nathan's arms, and he, in turn, saw in her the anchor that kept him grounded in the reality they had chosen to build together. The past was not erased, but it no longer weighed them down. With the birth of their children, a new cycle began. The house that once seemed too big for just 2 people was now filled with sounds that made the space more alive than ever. Small hands held his, and Nathan, who had spent so much time running from everything, now had a reason to stay. Juliet watched this new side of him with admiration. The man who once carried too many secrets on his shoulders now smiled without restraint, allowed himself to feel, to love, and to fully surrender to the family they had built. Each sunrise brought new discoveries, and each sunset reaffirmed that this was the life they had chosen, the life they wanted to live. The sea, always present as a silent observer, witnessed the moments that unfolded over the years. Walks at dusk, children's laughter blending with the sound of the waves, promises that didn't need to be spoken aloud, because they were already embedded in the essence of who they were. Time passed, but the feeling remained. The love that once seemed impossible became eternal, sealed not only by the birth of a new family, but by the decision to stay together, no matter what lay ahead. Nathan and Juliet, once lost in so many uncertainties, now had each other. And that, more than anything else, was enough.